السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. All praise belongs to God, Lord of the worlds. Peace and blessings be upon all of the messengers of God, especially the final messenger, Muhammad, peace be upon him. Today's topic, and we praise God for a new solar year, the Gregorian year. So today's topic is a reflection around time, because it is New Year's Day in the Gregorian calendar. So firstly, as we all know, it's the 1st of January today, and the month of January gets its name from a Roman god called Janus, who symbolized the passage of time and was depicted with two faces, two heads, one facing forward, and he had another head at the back of his head, if you like, facing backwards. This is how he was depicted, to symbolize looking forward to the future as well as looking back at the past, because of course the present is fleetingly there in the middle. Now, a comment on the word Roman god there is that we often hear about the Greek and Roman gods and goddesses and the pantheon, lots of gods, all the mythology. And of course, there is a strong element of polytheism there. But those traditions also had a monotheistic tradition at the center of it. And in fact, often the word gods or goddesses that is used, the word that should be used is angels or archangels. Because in pre-Islamic Arabia, there's something very similar going on, that the Arabs actually believed in one God overall, but they still fell into polytheism or idolatry by associating others with God, with their various idols or holy men of the past, or holy women even, but especially the angels. And the Quran has repeated references to that, about people worshipping angels besides God. So that's just a side comment, that when we talk about Roman gods and goddesses and all of that, it's not all polytheistic, actually. There's an element of the angels in there, because the Romans and Greeks and others who had those pantheons also had one supreme god. Either it was Zeus or somebody else, Apollo perhaps. I'm not an expert in these things. The next generation tend to be more of an expert, especially after reading Percy Jackson. They know all about this mythology. But, these people had generally the idea of one supreme god, which is the monotheistic basis, but they had all these other beliefs as well. But anyway, that's where January comes from, and the name of the months are significant. The same in the Islamic calendar, the 12, or Arabian calendar. The 12 months have interesting meanings. That's for another time, inshallah. A very quick comment on what I said. This is the Gregorian calendar. This is named after Pope Gregory, which is in the medieval period, I believe 15th or 16th century. Before that, the Western calendar was the Julian calendar, named after the famous Julius Caesar. And that was a solar calendar, but it was discovered that it was slightly inaccurate, and it was getting out of season with the movement of the sun, or the movement of the earth around the sun, to be precise. And so Pope Gregory issued the edict that his astronomers would correct the calendar, and they did so, and it's been known as the Gregorian calendar. Now, of course, in the Islamic tradition, we have largely a purely lunar calendar, whereas the Christian or Western calendar is almost entirely solar, except for one exception, that Easter is still based on the moon. So you have a lunar element to the Christian calendar. The Jewish calendar is lunisolar. So it's based on the lunar calendar, like the Islamic one, but it does tie it with the solar calendar as well, as do the Chinese and Hindu calendars, which is why you'll notice the Chinese New Year and the Hindu New Year and the Jewish New Year and the Islamic New Year are all linked to the new moon, to new crescent moon. It's all the conjunction or birth of the moon. But again, that's another topic for another time in terms of details of the calendars. But just to note one thing is that in Islam, in the history of Islam, there have been attempts also to tie in the lunar with the solar calendar, to have what we call a lunisolar calendar. And one of those was done in Iran, in Persia. It's called the Jalali calendar, by the emperor, named after the emperor Jalal, or Jalaluddin, his name was. And now the great Muslim thinker, Sayyid Hussein Nasr, who's written lots of great books and great work, especially on science and civilization in Islam. His book, The Young Muslim's Guide to the Modern World, is a brilliant book, which I recommend for any young Muslim who wants to understand this still. It's a classic for anybody in the teens, 20s, 30s even. In fact, once at the Cambridge University Islamic Society, I summarized the whole book in 2 sessions, in 2 study circles of about an hour and a half each, because it's such a brilliant book, which had a huge impact on me. So, mashallah, Sayyid Hussein Nasr is a great thinker. He does mention in one of his books that the Jalali calendar is more accurate than the Gregorian calendar. And I was intrigued by this for obvious reasons, because astronomy is one of my interests. And I looked into this, and I don't believe it's true. From what I've read, what I can ascertain, that's not true. The Gregorian calendar is indeed more accurate, which is why the whole world uses it, basically. And if that's true, we have to be careful as Muslims. We have this tendency to often say that our heritage is better in every way, or that we were there before the Westerners, or the rest of the world in other things. That was true certainly in the golden age of Islam and in many things. And there are still many, many positives in the Muslim world, or in Muslim communities around the world. But we shouldn't exaggerate and make claims which are not true, because that just undermines our own claim anyway. But, I may be wrong on that. Perhaps others who are interested might want to look into the Jalali versus the Gregorian calendar. Now, let's move into another very quick topic, which is wishing people Happy New Year. Within the Muslim communities, this becomes a big bone of contention every year. Should you wish people Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Easter, etc., etc.? And I think we should be very clear on this, that there are 2 views on this. There are 2 approaches. Many Muslims want to keep the practice of Islam kind of pure or purist in a sense, in terms of just strictly following what the Prophet and the companions did, and therefore that is limited to the 2 Eids. And then for other Muslims, they actually add another Eid, they call it Eid Milad al-Nabi. It's not to the same level, but it's the celebration of the Prophet's birthday. And those who do that, then they actually call Christmas Eid Milad al-Masih, because if you're celebrating the Prophet's birthday, why not celebrate Christmas as well, the birth of the Prophet Jesus? Because, of course, last week, on Christmas Day, we had the topic of Christ and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the 2 prophets of God who are like this in the Islamic tradition, very close to each other. So, that is one approach, to keep it pure. Another approach, though, is to say that you can wish people Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Easter, and, other festivals as well, of all of the other major religions. So we're talking about, Diwali, the Jewish calendar, the Jewish festivals, the Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, whatever it is, as a type of neighborliness. This is not part of the Islamic or religious practice per se, but it's a cultural matter, and it's a matter of being good neighbors, especially when we live with them. So when Muslims, for example, in India live with millions of Hindus and Sikhs as their next door neighbors. Here in the West, we live with people of all different religions. Our neighbors are largely Christian, with some Muslims as well, actually. It's just part of, this is the other view, that it's part of honoring your neighbor, which is a commandment. Honor your neighbor. فَلْيُكْرِمْ جَارَهُ. And if they're having a happy festival, to say, bless them, to say, well, may God's blessings be with you, just as they do for Eid, actually. I mean, this is the good thing about the modern world is my colleagues at work, whether religious or not, or friends, everybody, they wish us happy Ramadan, happy Eid, etc. And it would be kind of very churlish and rude, actually, not to reply to the greeting. As the Quranic principle, وَإِذَا حُيِّيتُم بِتَحِيَّةٍ فَحَيُّوا بِأَحْسَنَ مِنْهَا وَرُدُّوهَا. When you're greeted, return the compliment, return the greeting with something similar or better than it. So it falls under that as well, which is to say, if people are wishing you happy Eid and stuff, it's just polite to also wish them back happy to a happy celebration in their festivals. And of course, one should pray for everybody. This will be a topic for another time, but Imam Bukhari al-Adab al-Mufrad, you have the Sahaba, Abu Hurairah and others praying for their Jewish and Christian neighbors. May God bless you, may God protect your family, etc., etc. Sadly, that hadith is not so well known because it's in Al-Adab al-Mufrad. It's not in one of the 6 or 7 standard books of hadith, but it's a very important, or even if it is, it's certainly not heard of. I've never heard it in my life ever quoted in a masjid or in a khutbah anywhere. But it's a sound hadith and it's in Imam Bukhari's Adab al-Mufrad, but that's a topic for another time. So now let's move on to being the new year of the Gregorian Western calendar, which most of the world uses. So let's reflect on the nature of time, and especially there is an incredible teaching. In fact, there are 2 surahs of the Quran which are named after time. One is الدهر and one is Al-Asr, of course. And it's worth reflecting just very quickly on the difference, because Dahr refers to basically time over a long period of time, the ages, eons of time, if you like, or الزمان الممدود, as they called it in Arabic, many of the commentators. And the first ayah of that surah, هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. Was there a time during this extended time for human beings when there was nothing to be heard of, they did not exist? So Al-Dahr refers to the long march of time, if you like, whereas and the polytheists, the pagans, idolaters in Mecca, the Quraysh, used to say, ما هذه الحياة الدنيا نموت ونحيا وما يهلكنا إلا الدهر. That this is the life of this world, we die and we live, and the only thing which will destroy us is Al-Dahr, this extended time. And then there was a movement within the kind of, in the Middle East, they were known as the Dahris, people who attributed everything to time, a kind of philosophical school. But that is Al-Dahr. Now that is different to Al-Asr, because many of us know a very short surah, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. That by the token of time. And Asr is the time that runs out quickly. It's very different to Dahr, which is, millions, billions of years, you could say. The universe is about 13 billion years old. We know that from our scientific analysis. The Earth is about 5 or 6 billion years old. A long period of time. But Al-Asr refers to time which runs out very quickly, a time which is squeezed. And that is just from the Arabic, because Asara ya'siru means to squeeze, especially squeezing fruit for juice. Juice in Arabic is called asir. It's the same word as asar with a ya added. And, ya'siru khamra, to squeeze grapes for wine. That phrase is in the Quran. Of course, wine was prohibited later, but this is what asara ya'siru means. So, and that is why also the time of Salat al-Asr, it means late afternoon. Not the early afternoon, the late afternoon, which tends to pass by very quickly, and which is why it is said that the best prayer, or the middle prayer, Salat al-Wusta, is Salat al-Asr, the prayer of the late afternoon. Although the other view is that it's Salat al-Fajr, of course, that it's the prayer of the dawn. We won't get into that. And then there's a famous hadith which says, whoever misses Salat al-Asr, the prayer of the late afternoon, فَكَأَنَّمَا وُتِرَ أَهْلُهُ وَمَالُهُ. It's like he or she has lost his family and all his wealth, and all their wealth. So that's why that's a commentary on the ayah, حَافِظُوا عَلَى الصَّلَوَاتِ وَالصَّلَاةِ الْوُسْطَى وَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ قَانِتِينَ. Guard your habit of prayers, especially the middle or the best prayer, Salat al-Wusta means both things. And stand for God devoutly. Because the Asr prayer, especially, in the early bird of the afternoon, before sunset, certainly in the old days, before night falls, this is the last time you have to get stuff done during the day. So that time runs out quickly. It is the squeezed time. And it's by that token of time which runs out quickly that Allah said, وَالْعَصْرِ مِنَ الْإِنسَانِ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. By that type of time, humanity is in loss, except for those who have faith and trust and are secure in themselves. Amanu means all of these things. وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, and they do good works. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ, and they exhort each other, remind each other towards truth and justice. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, and they exhort each other, remind each other to have patience. I mean, these are great teaching, which is why Imam Shafi'i famously said that if Allah had only revealed these 3 or 4 verses, these 3 verses, that would have been enough. That's a topic for another time, as to how, the entire meaning of the revelation in the Quran can be summed up in a few verses. There's many statements like that about different surahs or passages, Surah Al-Fatiha, for example. But Imam Shafi'i is famous about Surah Al-Asr, that if God had only revealed these 3 verses of Surah Al-Asr, it would have been enough. That surah encapsulates the entire message. And by the way, those kind of statements from the Imams show that religion should not be overcomplicated. Many of us try to overcomplicate the religion. And the teachers and the scholars and preachers of Islam, in my view, have to make the religion much more accessible to people. One of the reasons many people in the modern world, including Muslims, are leaving religion, leaving Islam in their millions, in their droves, is because it's been made so difficult. When it should be easy, simple teaching, profound teaching. There are 3 verses. They're very profound. And they're enough. Or Surah Al-Fatiha, 7 verses. 7 verses, very profound, but they're actually enough. And we have to stop making the religion so elitist that only certain people should be able to talk about them. It's good to study for years and years and years, alhamdulillah, and to teach, but every believer, every person should be empowered that they know the basics. The basics are to basically worship God and be good to everybody else. I mean, that sums it up. And people should be empowered to do what's good based on that and follow their heart, as the Prophet ﷺ said. But anyway, that's Dahr versus Asr. Now, I'm going to go on a bit more reflections about Dahr. There's a great hadith which says, the Prophet ﷺ says, لا تسبوا الدهر فإن الله الدهر. Do not curse time, for God is time. And it's there in the Hadith Qudsi as well, where God says, according to the tongue of the Prophet, يَسُبُّ ابْنُ آدَمَ الدَّهْرَ وَأَنَا الدَّهْرَ بِيَدِي اللَّيْلُ وَالنَّهَارِ. That the son of Adam, the human being, the son or daughter of Adam, we should say, the human being curses time, whereas I am time. In my hand is the day and night, or the night and day. Now, of course, that statement, God is time, sounds a bit scandalous, or may sound polytheistic, etc. But it's there in the hadith, it's found hadith many times. God is time, or God says, I am time. And it had many meanings on it. But basically, one of the main meanings is that God is the creator of time and space. The medieval Muslim theology is very clear of this. It said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَالِقُ الزَّمَانِ وَالْمَكَانِ. God is the creator of time and space. And also that time is sacred. And by the way, and many people are aware, we should be aware that our understanding of time, we all have our basic understanding of time. There are many aspects of time which I will talk about, actually. But we should all be aware of 100 years ago, Einstein's famous theory of relativity proved, that it's been tested many times with experiments, that time is even more strange than we might think it to be. Because, time, why does time never go backwards? Why they're always going forward, the relentless march of time. Einstein proved that actually space and time are actually combined, and thus he coined the term space-time. So that space and time is where we do stuff, in a particular place at a particular time, and both of those can change. Time is always marching. But Einstein proved that actually space and time are interrelated. They're not separate. They're called space-time. And some of the Mufassirin since that time have translated الدهر as space-time, because الزمان الممدود, extended time, extension happened in space. So they argued that perhaps the idea of space-time is there in the word dahar, which is one of the names of God, actually, according to this hadith, where God says, I am ad-dahr. And also, it is one of the surahs of the Quran. So don't forget, although we don't normally include it in our list of 99 names of God, there are scholars who've argued, based on these hadiths, that ad-dahr is one of the names of God. And God is time sounds catchier and easier to say than God is space-time, I have to say, because space-time is difficult to understand as it is. But let's come back to something simpler. Time is sacred. Let's remember it that way. And again, there are many verses in the Quran saying this. For example, وَجَعَلْنَا اللَّيْلَ وَالنَّهَارَ آيَتَيْنِ فمحونا آية الليل وجعلنا آية النهار مبصرة لتبتغوا فضلا من ربكم ولتعلموا عدد السنين والحساب وكل شيء فصلناه تفصيلا. God said, we have made the night and day two signs, and we have erased or hidden the sign of the night, and we have made the sign of the day one which illuminates, so that you may seek the bounty of your Lord, and that you may know the passage of the years, the number of the years, and how to count, or the counting, the reckoning of time, days, months, days, weeks, months, years, and everything we have explained in great detail. But the beginning of this verse is that night and day are both signs of God. One of the key themes of the Quran is that everything is an ayatullah. Ayatullah is actually used in the Shia tradition. It's a type of status that religious scholars famously reach. But the essential meaning is the sign of God. And all of nature is described as a sign of God. And that could be the topic for another time. Somebody should compile a book, actually. I've always wanted to compile a book or compile every single reference to the signs of God in the Quran upon reflection. They really are quite incredible. But and they're all profound. But night and day are signs of God. They are sacred. They point to the one. The signs, the ayah. A sign is something that points to something else, like the sign above, outside your door, or on the way in the road, which points you in the direction of where you want to go. The sign is not important in itself. It's where it's pointing you, what it's indicating. Now, the signs of God are similar. Everything in nature is pointing, indicating something else, which is the one God behind everything. And each sign indicates that in a different way, according to its nature. So day and night are sacred. And by the way, based on that hadith, do not curse time. God says it, the Prophet, peace be upon him, says it. It is part of the spiritual etiquette never to curse, the ups and downs of time, or especially directly specific days or months or weeks or years. And this is a very timely moment, because over the last week, actually, over the last 9 months, ever since the global pandemic started, a lot of people have been cursing the year 2020. And this is very bad spiritual etiquette. Time is sacred. The years are sacred. And many people will find this difficult to accept, but it's a reality that everything in life is either a blessing or a blessing in disguise. And of course, 2020 has been a very painful year for the whole world. But as we say in English, no pain, no gain. That's a basic element of wisdom. It actually has been a blessing in disguise. Despite all the pain and loss and heartbreak, and we've all lost somebody close to us, close or relatively close, etc. We all know heartbreak and loss. And we've all lost our way of life, actually. And many people have lost, obviously, income and things we used to take for granted. So it's been a very traumatic time for everybody. But beyond that, it's very bad spiritual etiquette to say rude things about 2020 as it goes, and to say, good riddance or anything like that. Because that falls under cursing time. Something else similar would be people often say at work, in the modern work culture, oh, I hate Mondays. That would fall under cursing time as well. it's not good spiritual etiquette, because we know what people mean. Obviously, it's the start of the working week, and people love Fridays, which is good for Muslims. TGIF, thank God it's Friday, because this is our special day. But it's Mondays are often the most difficult day of the working week. But that's why we need sabr, right? Patience to get on with it, and not curse it. Now I'll move on to measuring time, because the verse I mentioned earlier of Surah Al-Isra mentioned that you see, these natural things are there, sun and the moon and all these cycles, so that you can measure the passage of the years and counting numbers, because the rotation of the earth, which used to look like the sun daily rising and setting, that's what causes it. The sun's daily rising and setting, which is caused by the rotation of the earth, it gives us the count of days and nights. And the movement of the moon around the earth gives us the month. The English word month comes from the moon, which is originally month. It became the month. And of course, the earth movement around the sun, which you have to measure very carefully by looking at the position of the sun and the stars, gives us the year, unless you do a purely lunar year of 12 lunar months. So the original ways of measuring time is with these natural cycles, which are the essential thing. But of course, human beings, with our incredible capacity, which God has given us, invented clocks to accurately measure time, and these clocks have become more and more and more accurate, and they're phenomenally accurate now. Of course, for those who've studied these things, I mean, the internet we're using right now, the internet runs on a very precise timekeeping, because the computers of the world have to talk to each other and be connected to share all the files and data, and they have to know exactly, every computer has a timestamp or a timing mechanism. Without an accurate clock inside every phone and every computer, the internet wouldn't work. Our modern lifestyle wouldn't work. And before, whereas the definition of an hour was quite simple, you divided the day and night into 24 equal parts. Now it's measured at the level of the cesium atom or something. I can't remember what the latest definition is, but when I was studying all this stuff 30 years ago, the definition of the second was some thousands or tens of thousands of vibrations of cesium atoms. I mean, what on earth is a cesium atom? Very few people in the world even know what cesium is. All I know is it's named after Caesar. But that's how accurate our clocks are. And I shall actually take a pause here, and in the second khutbah, which will be the second half of this Friday reminder, will be more on this in terms of the way we measure time and think about time, and how we experience it, which is really important, because time is sacred and our own spirituality is intimately linked to how we perceive and think about and experience time. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه الغفور الرحيم. I conclude there the first part, and I seek God's forgiveness for myself and for all of you. Please seek His forgiveness also, for He is the most forgiving, most merciful. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. All praise be to God, and blessing and peace be upon the messengers of God. So we're talking about the measuring of time, which is sacred and a great sign of God. And just as an anecdote, our sheikh, or who would be my grand sheikh, Sheikh Al-Albani, I never met him, but he was my one of my father's teachers. Sheikh Al-Albani, rahimahullah, very famous scholar of the 20th century, returned to his Lord in 1999, just before the 21st century. He was actually an horologist, a clock maker and repairer. Many people have forgotten that. Before he earned his living towards the end of his life, teaching hadith for years, and then writing many, many books. The approximately 100 or so books that he wrote in the great services to hadith. But as a younger sheikh, he actually made a living repairing watches. He was an horologist in Damascus. So the kind of people, when your watch breaks down, your clock breaks down, you go there and they use all these fine screwdrivers to fix all the tiny cogs in the watches. this is one of the greatest scholars of hadith of the 20th century. This is what he did for a living. And it is very important for religious scholars, if at all possible, to have a craft like that, to learn a craft so that they can make a living and earn money independent of religion if possible, so that they are free to speak, because this is a dilemma which all of us who serve as imams or Islamic scholars or anything like that, it is all of the problem about funding. Who's funding you? You know, you have to be careful in terms of how you're earning your living. But alhamdulillah, there are many sheikhs and imams and others, you know, who do have a craft, more than one craft, or a business. Some of them are businessmen, or they run a family business, which means that their income is separate to their religious activities, so therefore they are as free as possible. Right, so Sheikh al-Bani, the clockmaker. But before I come on to clocks, apologies, we reflect a bit more on the natural time cycles. So as I said, the original time cycle is the sun and the moon, the day and the night. And that is especially there for devout Muslims in the daily cycle, the 5 daily prayers, right? Now, what are the 5 daily prayers? If you ask many Muslims in the world, especially in English or any language, people will say, well, Fajr, Zuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha. Everybody knows that. But often we lose the meaning of what that means, is that they're intimately related to times of the day and night, caused by the rotation of the earth and the signs of day and night appearing around us. And in English, I strongly recommend that you don't call it Fajr prayer or Salatul Fajr, etc. You call it what it is in English. In Arabic, if you say Salatul Fajr, Salatul Dhuhr, Salatul Asr, Salatul Maghrib, Salatul Isha, in English, the correct translation is the dawn prayer, and then the noon or afternoon prayer, and then the late afternoon prayer, and then the sunset prayer, and then the night prayer. That's what it means. And especially in getting the world to understand, same goes for other non-Arabic languages, if you're trying to explain the religion to others. You know, people in the English world will find it far more understanding if you say, I'm going to do the dawn prayer now, or do the dawn prayer, or I'm going to do the sunset prayer. It makes more sense to them, because that is actually what it means in the original Arabic. For the Arabs, the Prophet and the companions, it wasn't an alien language with no meaning. They understood what it means, a certain time of day or night. And it's very important to grasp this, to understand the different parts of the day and night, and to say the prayers. And the prayers are not based on clock. It's not like clockwork. I'm going to come on to that in a minute. How clocks are very important, and they're the great invention by human beings, but we mustn't become too dependent on them. Is that the times of prayer respond to different times of day and night, and therefore they have a different feel to them, a different experience to them. So, for example, we know 3 of the prayers we recite loudly, and 2 of them we recite quietly. Upon reflection, there is an obvious link, because the 3 prayers we recite loudly are associated with darkness. Fajr, dawn, Fajr, Maghrib, sunset, Isha, nighttime, and also Tahajjud, Salatul Layl, nighttime prayer. Because with darkness, you know, our bodies are created and conditioned and adapted to begin to shut down or fall asleep. And reciting loudly counteracts that. It, you know, wakes you up, literally. Whereas the 2 prayers we recite quietly, Salatul Dhuhr and Salatul Asr, you know, afternoon, both afternoon prayers, they're in the busy time of the day, and when the sun is very bright or shining quite brightly. And that's the bustle of the day, as those verses mention, that at night, many verses mention, you know, at night generally you rest, unless you're praying extra. And during the day you're seeking livelihood and you're earning a living, etc., etc. There's a hustle and bustle of daily life, and it becomes more difficult to stop to pray. But in that hustle and bustle of the daytime, those daytime prayers are quiet, because we need to reflect and go silent and have silent reflection. So there is a great wisdom in the nature of the prayers themselves, which we lose if we start using, or if we use Arabic words only without understanding the meaning. And secondly, if we just regard them as times of the day clockwork. So for example, somebody once said to me that they weren't so impressed by people who prayed like clockwork, 5 times a day. They were talking about people who do that without thinking, and often people who do all their prayers, but God forbid, now can be very rude or very nasty or very horrible people. May Allah save us. And I thought about that, and the reflection I had was that actually the 5 daily prayers on time are very important in the sense of, as far as possible, of course, a person can do. They're very important because they capture the sacredness of the moment. Dawn time is very difficult. They're very different to noon, which is very different to afternoon, which is very different to sunset, which is very different to nighttime. They all have a different feel and experience. And, in physics, you have morning breeze, evening breeze, you have the morning chorus of the birds, you have the evening chorus of the birds, who are all glorifying God. I mean, the times of the day have a different feel and experience to them, and that is why the prayers, the number of rakat, the number of units, and also, as I said, reciting loudly or quietly, is all in harmony with that, and it's very important. That's why the 5 daily prayers are actually, quite important at different times. But we have to be aware of the different times of day and night to get the most out of it. They are not just. I have a clock here just to show, a rather large clock, which I'm going to. You can see that. We must stop thinking of prayer times like clockwork, because the clock doesn't capture day and night, light and darkness, dawn, afternoon, except, 12-hour clocks and 24-hour clocks, actually. At least they try to capture noon. The reason 12 is at the top is the sun is the highest moment of the sky at midday. That's they capture that much. And a 24-hour clock has midnight at the bottom where the sun is at the lowest point. But apart from that, there's not much else. When you think of it that way, 9 o'clock is roughly sunrise, and 3 or 4 o'clock is roughly sunset. So the clock actually does capture small elements of the sun's movement in the sky, but really not very much. And it feels very, very different. And one of the problems we have is that Muslims we're often wedded to the clock, and we're arguing about prayer times according to the exact second or minute, and we've forgotten the whole spirit of it. Is that we prostrate to God and remember God at different times of the sacred day or night, out of humility and thankfulness and gratitude to God for that. We especially see that in the extreme latitude, like we are in Northern Europe in winter or summer, where the prayer times, can be either squashed or squeezed or a bit uncertain. Is to remember what the spirit of all this is, and that's why in the Sharia actually we calculate, and we must remember the spirit. But I'll give you an example. Many years ago, we were at an Islamic camp in Wales, and a couple of hundred brothers and sisters camping out, and all of the wonderful things you do on a religious kind of training camp, and you get closer to nature, of course, in Wales, the mountain and the forest. And alhamdulillah, by the grace of God, I once got up early and at night, and could sense that it was probably close to the dawn time. So I got up bright and early, going in the darkness to the stream to do my wudu, the ablution. It was very cold, of course, but alhamdulillah, it's very good training, the cold water. Thankfully, the summer, so you could just about manage it, but it's still not easy. And, Jazakallah khair, there was an elder there, an uncle, who was up before me, which alhamdulillah, really good. And he was already at the stream, and he'd beaten me to alhamdulillah. He was doing his wudu and ablution. And there was this beautiful dawn breaking over the ridge, over the mountain ridge, in the valley we were. A beautiful dawn. And this is part of the problem when we're only looking at the clocks, not looking at the sky. We miss all these things: the beautiful dawn, the sunrise, the sunset, etc. With the twilight, dusk, and how it falls into nighttime. So I said to the uncle, I want to be both finished up, I said, Uncle, please give the adhan. It's prayer time, it's dawn prayer time, it's for the prayer time. And he did what, I would have done if I hadn't been looking at these things or studying these issues. And a lot of us would have done. He actually looked at his watch and he said, no, there's another 15 minutes left till dawn prayer begins. And of course, you see, that was a very sad moment for me because we had reduced these wonderful daily cycles of day and night to this kind of rather boring clock. And we're looking at the watch and we just forgotten completely what it's all about. There was a breathtakingly beautiful dawn available, which we should be looking out for. That's when that inspires you to actually fall in prostration and gratitude to God. And inshallah, it'd be good to revive that. I know many of us go on summer camps and things. Do try to revive the whole element of looking at the sun, moon, stars, etc., day and night. And do that with the children as well. It's great fun. Building sundial, watching the movement of the sun during the day and night, showing the stars at night, or the moon, the phases of the moon, etc. It's very important for children to reconnect with that, because our artificial environment, which is great science and technology, but often it has killed the human spirit, which is, we've adapted to the natural environment around us. And that leads me to an issue, which is the final issue for today, which is what you might call the tyranny of the clock, right? So we have to be careful. As I said, clocks, great physics, great mathematics, great science, great technology. As I said, one of our teachers, the great hadith scholar Sheikh Al-Bani, was an expert in repairing watches and clocks, mashallah. But don't let it go too far. And I've given an example already where we can lose sight of when it's time to pray and the beauty of the dawn by looking at a clock and saying, there's 15 minutes left. But there's many more examples. I recommend a book here called Pip, Pip, A Sideways Look at Time by Jay Griffiths. A brilliant book. The same lady who wrote Wild later, when she left our modern built-up environment and went off into the wilderness to reconnect with the human spirit. Oxford graduate in English literature, so a brilliant writer. Now, Pip, Pip, A Sideways Look at Time, I only read a couple of chapters and I couldn't read anymore because I was so heartbroken when I realized how much we've lost our contact with the original meaning of time, or certainly the natural cycle of time. And also, within reading those first 2 pages, just one sitting, anytime I looked at that book, I stopped wearing a watch. I've never worn a watch since, because of the tyranny of the clock and the tyranny of the watch. Now, of course, we need it, and I do check my phone. I use my phone to check my time, because obviously I have to attend meetings on time as far as possible, etc., etc. But this is one of the arguments she made, is that if you look at your watch all the time, it stresses you out. If you're running late for a meeting or whatever it is, and often people get stressed out more and more sitting in a traffic jam or in a stationary train or whatever, delayed train, and looking at the watch is not going to help. It's not going to get you there any faster. We might rather relax and say, well, I'll get there when I get there. And well, of course, you can make your apologies, you can make that phone call, or apologize when you get there. But, in our modern world, we're often really stressed because of time pressures. And of course, managing time is an important thing, which is not easy. But before I tell you the couple of examples that she gave, there's a famous quote from Albert Einstein again. I mentioned his space-time, etc. And relativity requires some very advanced mathematics, although the basic ideas can be communicated simply. And there's a good cartoon and things and YouTube videos, whatever, which tell the story without all the complex mathematics. But Albert Einstein was famously asked once, look, can you summarize your theory of relativity simply? And by the way, Einstein was Jewish background and he had a very mystical view of religion because he delved into these mysteries of space and time. We're getting very close to God. God is saying, "Ana Dahr, I am space-time." And it's no surprise that he took a very mystical view of religion, emphasis on the spirit, etc. More so than the law, although many of us would say you need law and spirit intertwined. But anyway, he was asked, can you summarize the theory of relativity simply for people? And his famous answer was, he said, as a heterosexual man, he said, when you're sitting with a beautiful woman, the time flies by in her company. when you're sitting and talking to a beautiful woman. But when you're doing something tedious and difficult chore, time seems to take forever. Yeah. And so he's talking about the experience of time. Because the clock, you see, there's no difference between 1 second or the other, 1 hour or the other. It's just ticking monotonously, meticulously, metronomically, literally. And it just ticks, and our cesium atoms and our internet clocks, they just keep going. There's no difference between 1 second or the other. See, the point of the clock is, and when we become too attached to the clock, is we forget that actually each hour is different to the next, depending on what you're doing, or depending on the time of day or night. Night or day. And that's why also, I try whenever possible, is to switch the lights off at night, or certainly for the darkness prayers, for the Fajr dawn prayer, for the sunset Maghrib or nighttime Isha prayers. Actually switch the lights off, at least then. I mean, we tend to stay up late because of artificial lighting, but at least for the prayers, switch the artificial lights off so we get some sense, and draw the curtain back so we get some sense of what the natural lighting is for those prayers. It enhances the original meaning of those prayers. Now, tyranny of the clock. If you go too far with the clock, Jay Griffiths in this book Pip Pip gives a couple of brilliant examples. The first one, she says, is she traveled around the world to write this book. She went to an African village where they were making preparation for the wedding. So a big village, lots of people who know each other, and you've got the bride's family, you've got the groom's family. They're making all kinds of preparations, especially for the bride and all the various cultural traditions that go behind that for the groom, etc., etc. And she asked him a question. She said, when is the wedding? When's the date of the wedding? When are they going to get married? And he said, you know what? She said, the African villagers just looked at her and laughed. This highly educated Oxford graduate, young English woman, they just kind of laughed at her that she doesn't understand time. And they said, they'll get married when they're ready, of course. And she said, that's exactly what happened. It was like, in the next couple of weeks sometime, but when they're ready, they'll get married. And basically, the villagers carried on with their tradition, whatever they needed to do. And eventually, when everything had been completed, all the ceremonies they do, all the party, the cultural tradition, whatever, then it was time. So, basically, elders would have agreed with the couple. Probably the day before would have been when they made the final decision. Right, tomorrow we're going to get married, or we're going to do the marriage. So she said, there was no card, etc., wedding card beforehand to specify the exact date. But the people use calendars as well. But that's village life. Now, we're not saying that we should adopt that in the West, in our modern society, because our society is different. And actually, we do have to set dates in advance, just the way society works, and etc., etc. But it's just a reminder that right now, for millions, possibly billions of people in the world, they have a very different experience of time, which is more connected to natural cycles and to human endeavor. That they were able to say to her that they'll get married when they're ready. The second example she gives, which I remember, is that she went to India, and it'd be very similar in Pakistan or Bangladesh or other parts of South Asia, Southeast Asia. She went to one of the busy bus depots to catch a bus from one city to another, because of course India and Pakistan, these are vast countries, and to go from one city to another, you can travel for hours and hours, maybe 1 or 2 days on a bus or train. And she inquired, I can't remember which city she was going to from where, but she inquired, she said, what time? Well, she asked, I need to catch a bus to XYZ city, Bombay or Delhi or somewhere, Mumbai. And they said, well, there's the bus, go over there. So she went over to the bus, and then she asked, what time does this leave, please? All these people have watches as well. And again, they looked at her and laughed. And they said, it will leave when it's full, right? Which to them seemed like an obvious answer, because that's how the economy works there, that they're not going to leave on this way long journey until they fill the bus with passengers. So they said, please take a seat inside or outside, and it will leave when it's full. And so she said that's what happened. There was no exact time, hour or minute when it's going to leave, but it was based on human experience that once the bus is full, that's the right time for it to leave. Now, again, I'm not saying that we adopt this here, because mashallah, here in Britain, even in Britain now, our trains leave on time to the exact second. And, the doors close 30 seconds before departure. and when you can't get on the bus or the train, sorry, after that, they don't run as late as they used to across Europe, or kind of modern society that is like that, with buses, tubes, trains, aeroplanes, etc. And so all that precision is good, but it's important to remember, especially when things run late. You see, we often find in our modern societies that we don't have any suburbs, we don't have any patience. That if a bus or a train or a plane is a few minutes late, or it's half an hour or an hour late, maybe a plane or a few hours late, a lot of people don't have the sabr for that, or the patience. But we have to remember that, in the past, people had enormous amounts of patience. And by the way, that is why. So with that, actually, I'll come to the final part of this, to do with the avoiding the tyranny of the clock versus the human spirit when it comes to time. And that is symbolized right now in the world, and has been for the last 20 or so years, by Mecca, the holiest place of Islam. Okay, there in Mecca, I'll show you a model here. In Mecca right now, if you can all see that, there's a model of the Kaabah. You see? Model of the Kaabah with the Maqam Ibrahim, the station of Abraham. A great, amazing place, the station of Abraham, is a physical little structure, but it's also a spiritual state. Maqam Ibrahim, the state of Abraham, the station of Abraham, and the Hatim, of course. Or Hijra Ismail, the lap of Ishmael. Anyway, but right opposite is the world's greatest clock, the clock tower. I don't have a model of the clock tower, but this is roughly what it looks like, in comparison. If anybody who's been there will know that the clock tower looms large over the Kaaba. And in fact, many of the pilgrims walking around the Kaaba are often looking at the clock all the time. It's so huge. Now, there's positives and negatives to this. So I'll talk about the negatives first, actually, and finish with the positives. What's been happening in Mecca for the last decade or more is that the Kaaba symbolizes the human heart. This is well known. This is an ancient understanding of the Kaaba. It is the house of God. Because there are hadith traditions which say, the heart of the believer is the house of God, just as the Kaaba is the house of God. And by the way, the whirling dervishes of Konya, of the tariqah of Rumi, spread all over the world, And you're talking about a great spiritual master whose blessing, he's helped teach or convey pass on the spirituality of the prophets, and the Prophet Muhammad especially, peace be upon him. And the whirling dervishes, they do that, the whirling around in one spot. I've never seen it in person, but people told me, for hours, it's quite incredible, the whirling on the spot, with one hand, the right hand up to the heavens, and the left hand cupped down towards the earth. Lots of symbolism there. But their whirling actually symbolizes the tawaf around the Kaaba, the circumambulation around the Kaaba. The walking around the Kaaba, which is an incredible experience. And by the grace of God, I've done that dozens of times, but also the visual spectacle, when you, especially on the higher floors of the Grand Mosque, the Masjid al-Haram, and you see literally 1 million people. Because the capacity of the Masjid al-Haram used to be 500,000 people, and now it's been expanded. I think it's about 2 million now or something, isn't it? But that visual spectacle is quite incredible, of course, to see tens of thousands of people circling the Kaaba. And it is something now which people who have not been to Mecca, including people who are not Muslim, are able to see now, because of the TV footage, etc., YouTube. I took a part in a debate at Oxford University a few years ago, in Oxford Union, about whether religion is good or bad for society. And there was a Jewish scholar, a rabbi, I believe, on the same side as me on the debate, who was arguing for, good religion. Like religion can be good for society, or overall has been a good force for the world. And one of the things he said in that, by the way, you can watch it on YouTube if you like, he actually said to everybody at Oxford University in this debate, which is recorded online, so lots of people have watched it, he said, do yourself a favor, he said, go to YouTube, etc., or search online for footage of people circumambulating, walking around the Kaaba. He said it's quite astonishing, it's really inspiring. This was a Jewish rabbi who said this at the Oxford debate, that he found that really inspiring. And by the way, topic for another time, there's another rabbi who's written a book basically proving that the original temple of Sulaiman alayhi salam for Beit al-Maqdis in Jerusalem also had a similar structure to this and had people walking around it 7 times anti-clockwise, exactly as the Muslims do in Mecca till today. Okay, so the point was the Kaaba symbolizes the heart, which is why the whirling dervishes, they spin around. You can't go to Mecca, they say we'll spin around our own heart because that is like the Kaaba is the house of God. Because God inspires us through our hearts. So that symbolizes the human spirit, the Kaaba. And now we have this giant clock, the world's biggest clock. And I think that it was the second largest, tallest building in the world, actually, the clock tower. It might have been overtaken now. But there's some symbolism there, because the clock, the very, very precise, cold, logical striking of the second of the clock, which does not differentiate between one moment of time or the other, is very different to the heart, which knows all about how every moment of time is different. Because at one moment we rejoice, and the next moment we're crying. I mean, the heart symbolizes the human spirit. The Kaaba symbolizes that. For example, in the Quran, وَأَنَّهُ وَأَضْحَكَ وَأَبْكَى وَأَنَّهُ وَمَاتَ وَأَحْيَا. It is God who makes you laugh, and it's God who makes you weep. It's God who makes you sick, and it's God who brings you a cure and healing. It is God who causes you to die, and God who causes you to live and revives you, including your heart. So the human spirit element of the Kaaba must not be overshadowed by, the cold. This giant clock symbolizes actually everything about our modern science and technology, which has a lot of positives to it, which I'll come on to. But I'll start with the negatives. That we have to be careful not to submit to the tyranny of the clock, which Jay Griffiths talks about in her book, Pip Pip, and to lose that contact with the natural cycles and with many aspects of human nature. But I'll end with actually the positives. In one sense, it is a great honor for Muslims in many ways, or for the world, that the world's largest clock at the moment is opposite the Kaaba in Mecca, which is in Mecca. In one sense, a very good thing, because that's the heart. It symbolizes the human heart, and it's a great piece of science and technology. And of course, for example, at Mina, during the Hajj, when you go to Mina, you throw stones at the pillar symbolizing the devil. So you do the stoning of the devil ritual, and then the tradition is to face Mecca and say a prayer. It's much easier now because you can see the clock tower from there. Before, in the past, it used to be quite difficult, because by the grace of God, I've done the Hajj 3 times over the last almost 40 years. And the first 2 times, it was quite difficult we got like hundreds of thousands of people there to work out which way to Mecca after stoning the devil. Now it's very easy, because there's this whacking great clock there, the Mecca Clock Tower, second tallest building in the world, looming over there, so that's next to the Kaaba. So unfortunately, actually, people kind of face the clock and pray, which is a bit worrying as well, which is another element of it, element of idolatry. There's another, not idolatry, I shouldn't say that, you have to be careful of that, you have to be careful always of idolatry. There's another element of that, which is that the Kaaba should perhaps be the most prominent thing. One of the problems, actually, of the clock tower is it's way more prominent than the Kaaba, right? It towers over Mecca now. Now, the word for the Kaaba, if you ask people what Kaaba means, most people would say the cube, yeah? And that is, of course, one of the meanings of the Kaaba. But, actually, I'll keep this here. The Kaaba, the another meaning of Kaaba is to be prominent. Okay? The Kaaba is the prominent structure. This is why the ankle bone in Arabic is called al-Ka'b. Your ankle bone is called the Ka'b because it protrudes, it sticks out. So there's another understanding of al-Kaaba is that it should be the most prominent building in Mecca. And certainly if you see reconstructions of what Mecca must have looked like at the time of the Prophet or before, and certainly for centuries, the Kaaba was the most dominant building, even though it's the bottom of the valley of Mecca, but because that's the house of God, is the most prominent structure of the Kaaba. Much like, until recently, until the last 20, 30 years, there was a law in London which forbade any building in this centre of London, the City of London, being higher than St. Paul's Cathedral, or obscuring the view of St. Paul's Cathedral. Because when St. Paul's Cathedral, which if you like is like the Mecca for the UK, for England, it was built on a hill next to the River Thames, and there's a huge cathedral dedicated to the glory of God, looking like a great ship sailing over London. And if you look at old pictures of London, it is breathtaking to see how St. Paul's Cathedral would dominate the skyline. And there used to be a law in this country that you cannot build high buildings near St. Paul's Cathedral because it had to remain the most prominent. Sadly, that law was changed, and now you have skyscrapers all around, obscuring that view. You still have a law like that in Washington, D.C., by the way, which was designed around very kind of spiritual principles. But that's why, United States, all the major cities are well known for these skyscrapers. Downtown is always where you have the skyscrapers. Yeah, a very American invention. And now you have them in the whole world, but they started in the USA. Except for one city, and that's the capital city, Washington, D.C. You go there, downtown, there's no skyscrapers. Why not? Because they still have the law that the Washington Monument has to be the most prominent structure, so you can't build anything higher or anywhere near the level of the Washington Monument. And that's why the buildings in Washington, D.C. are, much shorter. The Washington Monument, I mean, this is a topic for another time, but the whole layout of the National Mall in Washington, D.C., it's like a sacred site, and that's how it was designed. The Washington Monument is like the Kaabah for the Americans or the original people who designed Washington, D.C. It was supposed to be the center of the new way of life and symbolizing all kinds of sacred ideas and elements. But as I said, that's a topic for another time. In Medina, I remember 20 years ago almost, I went for a Hajj in 2002, the first Hajj after 9/11. In Medina, they were building the huge skyscrapers around the Prophet's Mosque, which is okay. But I remember talking to some of the local elderly Medina taxi drivers who did not like that at all. They said the most prominent building in Medina, they said, this is Medina, the city of the Prophet. The most prominent building here should be the Mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, which is how it had been for centuries. Since Medina was founded as the city of the Prophet, that the most prominent building in Medina was the Mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, Masjid al-Nabi, and Masjid al-Nabawi. Just as in Mecca, it was the Masjid al-Haram or the Kaabah. And they said they should stop building all these tall skyscrapers, all these hotels, which are kind of obscuring the view of the Haram until you get very close to it. And I told them, I said, in London we have a rule. And we have our giant cathedral, if you like. And there's a law there that you can't build tall buildings around. We had that law for centuries. And they were amazed. They looked at me and thought, wow, tell me about a Christian country where they are protecting the monuments like that, although we've stopped doing it as well now in London. But one of them said to me, we should have a rule like that in Medina. Should have a rule like that in Medina. But on the other hand, the tall buildings do accommodate many more, like millions of pilgrims there in Mecca and Medina. So there are positives to these things as well. And so with that, I'll stop because I've violated the rule on time. I mean, there's a very long Friday sermon, which I don't recommend, but it's not it's not strictly in a masjid or anything, and all of you are free to to watch or not. Those watching online, in any case. So I will end with the reflection and end with a short prayer, of course. So we pray to God Almighty to bless our time, to enable us to understand the sacred nature of time, to understand and experience that sacredness of time, which this day represents for billions of people around the world. As we mark a new year, we ask Allah to bless our time, that we're able to do more goodness in our time and achieve more of our good ambitions and dreams and aspirations. And our scholars would say, Nasallallahu an yubarik fi waqtina. It's a common prayer to give blessing in our time, because the clock tells us that 1 second, 1 hour, the same as the next. But in the human experience, it's not. In 1 hour, you could have incredibly productive work. In another hour, you could waste your time completely, or do actually very evil stuff, do negative things as well. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم بارك لنا في وقتنا وفي ليلنا ونهارنا يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. وصلى الله تعالى على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وأقيموا الصلاة. Okay, I'm going to have the prayer as well, the 2 rakat Friday prayer. So, اقرأ please.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي الصلاة حي الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. إن هذا القرآن يهدي للتي هي أقوم ويبشر المؤمنين الذين يعملون الصالحات أن لهم أجرا كبيرا وأن الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة أعتدنا لهم عذابا أليما. ويدعو الإنسان بالشر دعاءه بالخير وكان الإنسان عجولا. وجعلنا الليل والنهار آيتين فمحونا آية الليل وجعلنا آية النهار مبصرة لتبتغوا فضلا من ربكم ولتعلموا عدد السنين والحساب وكل شيء فصلناه تفصيلا. وكل إنسان ألزمناه طائره في عنقه ونخرج له يوم القيامة كتابا يلقاه منشورا. اقرأ كتابك اقرأ كتابك اقرأ كتابك كفى بنفسك اليوم عليك حسيبا. من اهتدى فإنما يهتدي لنفسه ومن ضل فإنما يضل عليها ولا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى وما كنا معذبين حتى نبعث رسولا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. اللهم بارك حمدا كثيرا. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله أكبر. وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد. من شر فتنة المسيح الدجال. اللهم إني أعوذ بك سبيل سبيل سبيل. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. استغفر الله استغفر الله استغفر الله. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام تبارك يا لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له له الملك والحمد ولا كل شيء قدير. اللهم لا مانع لما أعطيت ولا معطي لما منعت ولا ينفع الجد منك الجد. الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم.